Alright, so as all of my OG subscribers will know, I've had my 280ZX for almost 7 years as of now, coming up on our 7th year anniversary together. So I've been thinking, I've kept the car relatively stock for quite some time, and I think I'm getting to that point where I'm kind of ready to show it some race car justice and do some nice but simple modifications to improve the vehicle's performance, mainly its handling. So these are control arms and tension rods completely custom made by a company called Techno Toy Tuning, aka T3. These will replace the stock control arms, ball joints, and sway bar end links, as well as the tension rods, which have to do with caster. These are completely custom made for race applications and the second generation 280ZX. Every single part is custom. They're all welded together. Each tab, each joint, each nut and bolt is all custom. There's nothing original here. This is made from scratch. And this will provide much better steering response, suspension performance, as well as minimize caster deflection to almost zero for an excellent responding car. This also allows the use of a thicker sway bar as on the stock control arms. There's only one small thin tab where the end link goes through the control arm, and with custom thicker sway bars it tends to actually wallow out and remove itself from the control arm, since the metal is not thick or strong enough to support a thicker sway bar. But this will solve that problem as it's much more reinforced. Now if we take a look at the car's stock suspension components, we can see that the stock tension rod is quite small, and it comes up to two flimsy rubber bushings that kind of have to take all the hit when it comes to keeping the caster aligned. Now a common upgrade is to put polyurethane bushings in place of these rubber ones. However, that puts too much of a load on the tension rod and they typically snap, which can result in you wrecking your car. Here's a look at the stock control arm. This is the stock end link tab that I was talking about that tends to rip away under higher loads and with aftermarket sway bars. Now another thing you may notice, or you will notice, are these wheels. I picked these up a couple weeks ago. These are the Atara Racing 15x9s. The tires I'm running are the Exta All-Season Performance tires in 225/50 R15. And believe me, with this alone, it drastically improves the handling of the vehicle compared to those really soft 70 series tires that came on them stock. So I do have a lot of work ahead of me here. I basically have to disassemble the entire front suspension system. So everything you see here has got to come off, including the braking system. So we have to basically disconnect the tie rods, the tension arm, sway bar, McPherson strut assembly, ball joint, as well as removing the brake caliper. And hopefully all of these old 36-year-old bolts that have never been removed before will come loose without either rounding off or snapping. So without further ado, let's get into it. So now that I have a clear area to work with, I'll start removing some of this hardware. Alright, next thing, the end link. It's technically supposed to do this when there's no preload on it, but fuck it. Actually, that wasn't that bad. Pretty easy. Didn't spring out like I thought it would. And now, if you don't have a puller, a trick you can use is take the castle nut, position it upside down, throw it on about halfway, and grab a BFH or an MFH, give her a couple whacks and see if it comes loose. And there we go. Out it comes. Just like that. Okay, that wasn't too bad. Oh yeah. Okay, well that is out. Now let's... Oh yeah. Listen to that old bushing. Oh yeah. That is old ass bushing for sure. So this is my super innovative, patent pending Hooligan Motorsport leverage tool. So there's a nut on the back here. You obviously need two people to take this bolt out, but no, you don't. And here's the control arm. Okay, cool. Just about all the preliminary stuff is removed. Now I just got to take the strut assembly off because I'm going to go a little bit lower. What I have on here are this very soft, very entry-level Eibach progressive springs. They have a slightly stiffer spring rate, and they drop the car about ½ an inch. What I'm going to do on all four corners is just cut the helper spring or the helper coil off, and should drop me down about another 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch, and my wheel fitment will be mint. Alright, so I'm going to attempt to do this by myself. Let's see if I can pull it off. Oh. This fucking thing is heavy. Oh. Yeah, this entire part of the front suspension is removed. Now, take a quick break, have some beer. So typically what you would do when removing a spring from a strut assembly is you put these compressors in between the coils to relieve the pressure, so when you remove the retaining nut it doesn't shoot out. However, I mean, these springs are pretty loose as they are. Like, I can just swivel them around in here, so I don't think that'll be necessary. So I'm just gonna grab the oil impact and pop this thing off, and yeah, should be fine. And just like that. Okay, so here's my spring. Now it's going to be hard to tell exactly how much it's going to lower, because when the vehicle is sitting on its suspension, obviously this is compressed quite a bit. Typically, as you can tell, this contacts the upper coil, because like I said, I'm only looking for at most an inch lower. I'm not going to slam the car. It's not going to be frame banging, because that just kind of rules out suspension reliability. You probably asked me, well, why don't you just go with coilovers or lower springs? The answer to that is coilovers, if you do it right to get the Techno Toy Tuning stuff, that'll run you about $2 grand, which is pretty crazy. Sure, you could adapt 240 SX coils and that whole thing, but I really don't want to cut up my spindles and have them welded, and that just opens up a whole nother can of worms, especially when you have cartridges that are not replaceable. So if you blow a shock, you're screwed. You got to buy a new set of coilovers, and that's a bitch. And lowering springs, the next step from this is Voigtland springs, or Voigtland, or however you pronounce it. But that only gives me about another 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch of low from where I already am, and that's just not going to cut it for me. So I'm gonna cut it. It appears I'm going to be cutting about 1 1/4 coils off of the spring, and that will achieve about another 3/4 of an inch of low, which is right where I want. Alright, and here's the finished product. 1 1/4 coils off the spring. That should bring me right where I want to be. So now it's time to start putting the new parts in. And this is the part where alignment comes into play. So of course, obviously I will have to have the car immediately aligned before I start driving it. I've got the end link here at the furthest out point. I kind of mocked it up with the stock control arm, and it seems to kind of be similar to how it's sat stock, because of course you do want to start with the stock position and kind of work your way in if needed. But yeah, I'll have to kind of play around with this a little bit. Okay, got just about everything in place here. This looked like something was supposed to go in between here, but I guess it's not, because it all sits really nicely. I have everything mocked up. I tightened that down a little bit. One thing I am going to have to do is, I guess, adjust the track, which is because it moves in and out. Like if you're doing a drift car, you move it all the way out, for example. So what I'm going to have to do, I'm going to have to measure that side. I'm going to see how far that comes out to get an idea of how far this should come out. Alrighty, boys and girls. Well, the passenger side of the suspension is all put back together. Everything's tight. Sway bar end links, knuckle, caliper is on, tension rod, tie rod. We're good to drop her down, except one thing you want to do with cut springs is make sure everything is lined up here before you lower it. You want to make sure it's all seated up in top. That's just the characteristics of smaller springs. Well, she is definitely a little bit lower. That's for sure. Way less wheel gap than before. Of course, the suspension still has to settle, but shit, that's right about where I want it to be. Okay, cool. Now basically we'll have to turn her around and do the other side. All right, part 2. Here we go. All the new suspension on the driver's side is in place now. Got the knuckle, tension rod, sway bar, and end link, and of course the control arm. Everything is all together, just got to tighten it down. So basically all I need to do now is cut the other spring, and then we'll be ready to reassemble. Okay, so now it's time to lower the rear. This is actually extremely simple. You could basically have the strut out in under 10 minutes if you're a noob. Basically, it's exactly like a 240 SX. So you have bolts up here. I have 3 remove, and down here in the back, on the I'm not sure if you can see, but there's a knuckle back there. Remove that bolt, and that's it. It slides right out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Alright, so this time around I cut off 1.5 coils. It might still be a little too high up because these cars do sit a little higher in the rear by design, so I might have to cut a little more. But once I'm done, we'll go ahead and let it off the jack and see how it sits, and go from there. Alright, got the rear strap back in, so let's drop it down and see how it sits. Alright, well, I'm going to try to filter out the wind noise as best as I can, but it's been a couple hundred miles now, and this is how the car sits. It settled down really nicely. The fitment is really nice. I mean, if I were to, I would have gone with slightly bigger tires, but they don't make a 55 series for a 225/15, so this is kind of what I'm stuck with. But, you know, the rear I was concerned about. The rear I thought was going to be sitting a little too high, but, I mean, the car's got an empty tank right now. It's probably got a gallon in the tank, but, I mean, it still looks pretty good. You know, other than the way it looks, the car's handling has improved a lot. But the cut springs, the ride is surprisingly better. It's, you know, a little bouncy, you know, like in city when you're kind of, you know, below 30 miles an hour or so. But when you get on the highway, 40, 45, 50 and up, you don't notice it. It feels pretty normal. The car responds really well. I actually took this thing to a track night in America, Thunder Hill, where I really tested out its abilities. I didn't film much of it because I was really focused on just learning how to drive my car on a track. But I got a couple clips here, as you can see. This is from a trailing car. It's a 350Z, 2004, friend of mine, and you can kind of see how the car is reacting, the kind of cars I'm chasing down. Even kind of, you know, got waved by a couple Miatas since I was, you know, on their asses in the turns, and that's what you do when it's novice night. So, I mean, I'm really impressed with the way the car handles. You know, obviously the cut springs is temporary until I can get some legit, you know, coilovers for it. But for now, I mean, it's really excellent. As you can see, the car is very flat. It responds very well. It doesn't bounce a whole lot. And overall, I'm really satisfied with the responsiveness of the new control arms and tension rods. You know, there's a little bit of clunking here and there, because I guess because it's metal on metal, you sometimes hear that when going over bumps, but who knows, maybe things need to be adjusted, maybe I need some strut mounts. But overall, I mean, the car's handling has drastically improved, and it's basically ready to be driven really hard on the street and attack some serious corners, as you will see here. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. I have a lot of footage to edit. I've done a lot more things on this car since I've uploaded this video, so a lot more content on the 280ZX is coming soon. So if you like these kinds of videos and you like my car, feel free to subscribe, and you can kind of follow along with my progress.